I first want to tell you how touched I was by the joyful singing and dancing that I saw here and heard. It really, really moved me. And I want to thank you for inviting me to speak to you tonight. Both Leket and DARA are working to improve the human condition. My topic, as you realize, is going to be a bit more somber. I am a Jew. These were the last defiant words of a sensitive and brilliant human being, Daniel Pearl, before he was beheaded in 2002, only because he was a Jew. In a 1942 article appearing in Julius Streicher's Der Stürmer, which was the Nazi propaganda newspaper, the author asks, "Wann ist die jüdische Gefahr beseitigt? When will the Jewish danger be over?" He cites all fruitless historical attempts to address the question, including forced conversion, assimilation, ghettoization, expulsion, only to come to the conclusion that the Jewish question is a world question. Just as Germany is not safe from the Jews as long as even one Jew remains in Europe, so Europe cannot solve the Jewish question as long as Jews live in the rest of the world. The Jewish danger will be eliminated only when Jewry throughout the world has ceased to exist. Why bother citing statements from 80 years ago? Quote, "It is necessary to slaughter them and murder them, according to the words of Allah. It is forbidden to have mercy in your hearts for the Jews in any place and in any land. Make war on them any place that you find yourself, any place that you encounter them. Kill them, kill the Jews. Have no mercy on the Jews, murder them everywhere." Palestinian TV, October 13th, 2000. Quote, "The Jews want to present themselves to the world as if they have rights, but in fact they are foreign bacteria, a microbe unparalleled in the world. May He annihilate this filthy people who have neither religion nor conscience." Abdullah Jarbu, Hamas Deputy Minister of Religion. Quote, "This is the promised land. The Jews think it is promised to them, but what was promised was to gather them in order to exterminate them by divine decree." Fatah Auda TV, Pulse of the Homeland, February 19th, 2017. How did we get here? These statements are not just heard in backward, xenophobic societies from the mouths of the uneducated. Let's see what have Jews been accused of throughout history, and if anything has changed. A, deicide, the murder of God 2,000 years ago. Quote, "Deep down, historically speaking, the Jews are God killers," unquote. Giacomo Babini, Bishop Emeritus of Grosseto, April 11th, 2010. B, ritual murder and blood libel. Quote, "Jews murder non-Jews and use their blood for Passover matzahs." Dr. Salah Sultan, President, American Center for Islamic Research, Columbus, Ohio, March 31st, 2010. C, poisoning and spreading of epidemics. Quote, "Jewish tourists infected with AIDS are traveling around Asian and African countries with the aim of spreading the disease." Husnia Hassan Musa, lecturer at the National Research Center, Al-Ilm, Egypt, November 2001. D, plotting to control the world. Quote, "Jews ruled the world by proxy. They get others to fight and die for them. Jews invented socialism, communism, human rights, and democracy to avoid persecution and gain control of the most powerful countries." Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Prime Minister of Malaysia, October 2003. Jews have even been accused of orchestrating the Holocaust, their own attempted extermination. To read anti-Semitic lies in the lay press of third world countries, and even in the West, is disturbing enough. With far-fetched rationalizations, we can diminish our fear by saying that these are the uneducated, the unenlightened, the mongers of hate. However, when these accusations of Jewish inhumanity make headway into the medical and academic realms, which profess logic and objectivity, then there is no more emotional refuge in rationalization. Dr. Hamdi El-Sayed, head of the Egyptian Medical Syndicate, declared on November 27, 2009, that the decision to bar Israeli physicians from the breast cancer regional conference in Egypt was based on the torture of Palestinians and the theft of their organs by Israeli doctors for use in transplantation. University of California, Berkeley professor of medical anthropology, Nancy Shepard Hughes, wrote, quote, "Israel is at the top. It has tentacles reaching out worldwide. It has a pyramid system at work that's awesome. They have brokers everywhere, bank accounts everywhere. They've got recruiters, they've got translators, they've got travel agents who set up the visas. They pay the poor and the hungry to slowly dismantle their bodies or simply take what they want from fresh corpses. Body parts are commodities to be harvested and sold to the rich." With all these crimes at the Jew's doorstep, is it any wonder that many in the world today echo the words of Goebbels? Die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune. I was born in Israel with Israel, and I distinctly remember feeling special. My generation represented the resurrection from the crematoria. And at no time do I recall feeling a sense of powerlessness or fatalism. Although our home was religiously traditional, my education focused on the history of Am Israel, the nation of Israel, and the realization of biblical prophecy in the state of Israel. Like myself, most of my friends were children of Holocaust survivors. Gradually, we learned some of the stories that our parents dared to tell us, but my family's story was somewhat unique. Although my mother and her entire family were deported to Auschwitz, my father's story was very different. At the age of 18, his father sent him on a ship carrying 800 Jews to British Mandatory Palestine from Romania. After a tumultuous voyage, he arrived at Netanya on the Mediterranean coast in July of 1939. 2 months later, on September 1st, the war broke out. He enlisted in the British Army, in the British 8th Army, and was based in Alexandria, Egypt. In 1944, his parents, one of his sisters, and her son all went to Auschwitz. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, my father's unit was stationed in Venice. There he met a recently liberated young survivor who reported that in January, 5 months earlier, he had seen my grandfather alive in Dachau. My father took leave, hitchhiked to Munich, and went into the Dachau concentration camp. After confirming my grandfather's barrack and block, my father approached the door, where he immediately saw his father washing a cup. As he entered, my grandfather asked him, "Yes, what do you want?" My father said, "I'm your son, David." "No," said my grandfather, "my son is in Palestine, and he's not a soldier." My father took out a family photo to prove to his father who he is. Everyone in the barrack cried. The first thing my grandfather wanted to do was to pray. There were big piles of talitim, prayer shawls, and tefillin, phylacteries. He took one of each and prayed. The tefillin I use today is from Dachau. I don't know to whom it belonged. From then on, my father was involved in ferrying Jewish refugees from the camps by truck to Italy and on to Palestine. One of the passengers on his truck was later captured by the British and imprisoned in preparation for deportation to a concentration camp in Cyprus, until she was freed by the Palmach unit of the Haganah, led by Yitzhak Rabin. He met her again on the beach in Tel Aviv. She became my mother. My father fought in the War of Independence and the Sinai Campaign. Why do I tell you this? For me, it was easy to fight for Israel and for the Jewish people. I stood on the shoulders of giants who had Jewish history flowing in their veins and whose hands forged it in Israel's formative years. Although I was keenly aware of the perils facing Israel, at all times my generation of young Israelis knew that it had a responsibility not just to rebuild the state where they lived, but also to the Jewish people as a whole. Passivity and ignoring reality were not viable options. The phrase, en brera, no alternative, was the theme of Israel's existential lexicon. Not only were we justified by God and history to have Eretz Israel, but even the practical realities demanded it. Where else could we take control of our own destiny as a nation and not be helpless in the face of murderous waves of hatred and persecution that had buffeted us as a people for millennia? Last month, my 38-year-old daughter took part in the March of the Living, an annual pilgrimage to the extermination camps in Poland, followed by a stay in Israel for its Independence Day. On April 24th, she emailed me this, quote, "A few private thoughts that I wrote on the road to Auschwitz today. Thinking about my family crammed in, listening to babies crying and old men crying with them. I remember Safta, grandmother, telling me how her Zaidi, grandfather, cried all the way there. I sit here complaining about being hot. I'm nauseated. I don't know if I would have survived even the ride. My children, my 4 precious jewels. I keep thinking about them, the sound of their cry, their eyes. My grandparents, would they have died on the train? Would people have trampled over their bodies? I fight back the tears, but they overcome me. I would have surrendered, I know it. I would have walked in with my 4 children, trying to hold all of them. But I only have 2 arms. Sorry. I can't see where I'm. Luckily, it wasn't me. It was stronger and braver people than I am. It was my grandparents, my heroes, and my tears keep rolling. For 5.5 hours, a steady stream. Have I lost my mind? Will I have any left when I actually arrive there? In 5 days, my feet will stand proudly and firmly in Israel. My soul will feel at home, like a sleeping child nestled on his mother's chest. We will sing and dance and celebrate the life that we were given by them. But today is my day for tears. I'll get better, don't worry. In the last few years, we have seen an exponential rise in the expression of hate, intimidation, and threats aimed not only at Israel, but at Jews in general. This is not just in backward society, but is part of the routine on our campuses, in our lecture halls, in our media. The enemies of the Jews appear to be able to mobilize large groups of young, vocal people who are ignorant of history and therefore unable to learn from it. With the revelation of the horrors of the Holocaust following the war, Overt anti-Semitism was frowned upon. For its first 20 years, Israel was viewed in the West and by the then principled political left as the underdog who miraculously survived against all odds. Pardon me. But as it stubbornly overcame repeated mortal threats through military victory and technological innovation, Israel lost the sympathy vote. You see, many in the world love to build monuments to dead Jews, but are unhappy when Jews refuse to cooperate as the subjects. Israel has been a leader in medical and scientific developments and has enriched the world with many innovations which have the potential to cure disease, alleviate suffering, and better the human condition. The sharing of Israel's knowledge and experience throughout the medical world should be welcomed and incorporated into the armamentarium of medical teams everywhere through international conferences and publications. Instead, the last decade has seen an avalanche of politically motivated articles which attack Israeli medical professionals by alleging discrimination against Palestinian patients, commission of war crimes, and causing a deterioration of health standards in the West Bank and Gaza. Such articles are accepted for publication by reputable journals, frequently without the standard requirements of providing proof or citation. Israeli medical academics are frequently barred from attending international conferences held in countries that do not recognize Israel. On campuses, so-called conferences are held wherein Israeli medical practices are vilified through pseudo-scientific presentations. In response to a biased piece of anti-Israel propaganda disguised as medical literature in The Lancet, a group of physicians and dentists in Toronto formed an organization to combat racism and anti-Semitism in medicine and academia in March 2009. Doctors Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, DARA, was born. Currently numbering over 750 members around the world, DARA is a grassroots organization of healthcare professionals whose activities are directed at opposing racism and anti-Semitism in the medical realm specifically and academic environments generally. It seeks to ensure that medical publications maintain the standards of verifiability expected of scientific literature in avoiding subjective articles aimed at vilifying any race, religion, country, or nationality. DARA has held several continuing medical education accredited conferences with international speakers. It has successfully challenged conference organizers who have chosen venues which would bar Israeli attendees. Through meetings with university administrators, it has facilitated change in policy as pertaining to standards of behavior at events on campus property. It has established cooperative relationships with various organizations in Canada, US, and the UK. DARA's accomplishments are numerous, and we recognize that the challenges ahead are great, but we will continue to confront the incursion of politics and propaganda into medical and scientific literature. Those of you in the audience with credentials in the healthcare field are welcome to join DARA. Membership is free. The website is daradocs.org. The battle for the survival of Israel is fought on many fronts. The only state in the world facing a campaign of delegitimization is Israel. While hundreds of thousands are massacred in Syria and millions are displaced, while gays are hanged from lampposts in Iran and put in concentration camps in Chechnya, while courts in Pakistan and Indonesia incarcerate people for blasphemy, while ancient Christian communities in the Arab Middle East are decimated, while Saudi Arabia flogs girls for not wearing acceptable attire, while China suppresses religious minorities such as the Falun Gong, and North Korea has become a concentration camp, the UN and its various organs have time only to attack Israel. From its creation in June 2006 through June 2016, the UN Human Rights Council over 1 decade, adopted 135 resolutions criticizing countries. 68 out of these 135 have been against Israel, more than 50%. From 2012 to 2015, the United Nations General Assembly has adopted 97 resolutions criticizing countries. 83 of these 97, that's 86%, were against Israel. The inevitable question is, how do all these criminal states avoid UN censure while the only Jewish state, a full democracy, merits so much attention and vilification? The inescapable answer is in the question. It is a Jewish state, subject to the same age-old hatred we have discussed above. Within the Protestant world, many churches are deeply hostile to the state of Israel. They present the Palestinians as victims of Israeli oppression while ignoring the murderous victimization of Israeli citizens at their hands. This much is generally known. What is less known is the even more disturbing fact that this perverse animus is increasingly fed not by the politics of the present moment, but by theology. This is all the more striking because millions of evangelical Christians are among the most passionate supporters of Israel. These Christian Zionists trust and accept the Bible's account of how God chose the Jewish people to form a kingdom of priests and promised them the land of Israel. That religious belief has turned Christian Zionists themselves into a key target for evangelization on the part of those churches that have Israel in their crosshairs. And those evangels are bearing fruit. The Christian world likes to forget it, but the history of its relationship with the Jews was gruesome. In the medieval Europe, the Catholic Church used blood libels to incite the population against the Jews, converted them at knife point, and murdered them in great number. These pogroms were driven by a particular demonology called replacement theology, also known as supersessionism. Going back to the early Christian father Origen in the early 3rd century, this idea holds that all the promises God had made to the Jews now belonged to the Christians. Exiled from God's love, the Jews had become the party of the devil. After Auschwitz, this vicious theology disappeared from view. But it turns out that it only went underground. For now it has returned with a fresh geopolitical impetus furnished by, quote, Palestinian liberation theology, itself being a fusion of Palestinian political aspirations and some Christian thinking. Through this, Jesus becomes a Palestinian persecuted by the Jews, while Jesus' descendants become today's Palestinians crucified in the very land that was promised to them. Their liberation would, of course, require the dissolution of the Jewish state. These malevolent concepts spreading from Palestinian Christians to churches in the West are rooted in an audacious strategy adopted by the Palestinian Authority to deny Israel's right to exist by changing Jewish history to suit its own end. Part of this strategy involves denying that Jesus was a Jew from Judea and turning him into a Palestinian who preached Islam. In this battle of delegitimization, the shameless enemies of Israel have no qualms about rewriting history. Quote, Jesus was the first Palestinian. Mahmoud Abbas declared this in Christmas 2016. Wow! Jesus, who lived 7 centuries before Muhammad was born and 136 years before Judea was renamed Palestinia Syria by Emperor Hadrian, was a member of a nation that did not exist. There was never a Jewish people in Jerusalem, a Jewish temple in Jerusalem, never mind 2. And according to UNESCO, the walls of the ancient city are Muslim heritage sites. So there was no Jewish history there, and therefore no Christian history. For wasn't Jesus in that non-existent temple? In fact, was he not an observant Jew himself? The insanity has reached a point where a UN vote that the earth is flat would require geography and astronomy books to be rewritten. Today's Israeli-Palestinian conflict has placed many Christians and Jews almost in the same boat. Both are viewed as infidels by Islamists and are subject to jihad and its intent of global Islamic hegemony. There is an Arabic saying commonly heard in the Middle East regarding the fate of the Jews and Christians. It was brandished as a popular slogan among supporters of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who spent the war in Berlin and urged Hitler to exterminate the Jews in Palestine, including the children. Salaf es-sabt laka al-had kidamu. After Saturday comes Sunday, i.e., first the Jews, then the Christians. What can those of us here in Canada who love Israel do to help her in this battle against lies, distortions, and defamation? I know that a couple of weeks ago, a large group of people in this room visited Israel. You can tell friends and strangers about what you see there. A land of a brave people who have returned to their God-given home after millennia and have rebuilt a vibrant state where every citizen, Arab and Jew, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, black, white, brown, all share in its freedoms and opportunity. Urge them to go and see for themselves like you've done. And write to the news media the truth. Challenge the lies of uninformed and biased journalists. Urge your political representatives to educate themselves about the history and the legal facts as related to the land of Israel. The Israelis are taking the brunt of the toll in being on the front line in this global conflict. They sacrifice the lives of their sons and daughters and live with constant threat of individual attack and national annihilation. All the while, they have to maintain a state that provides for its citizens health care, education, security, and all that every modern democracy does. This is at substantial social and material cost. There are many families in Israel whose children are hungry. There are Holocaust survivors living in poverty and misery. Fortunately, Israel has friends like the people in this church. Before the nation of Israel entered their promised land, they were commanded about a number of agricultural practices, and one of these is gleaning, or in Hebrew, leket. Leviticus 23:22, I don't have to tell you, instructs the Jewish farmers to leave behind for the poor any grain that the harvester's sickles have missed. The plot of the book of Ruth hinges on this practice, which seems to have been quite common at that time, particularly during periods of scarcity due to drought or war. Ruth was a Moabite convert to Judaism who married Boaz, in whose field she was gleaning the fallen wheat. She became the great-grandmother of King David. The Mashiach, in Hebrew, the Anointed One, but understood today to mean the Savior, is to be a descendant of King David and therefore of Ruth. Thus, the commandment dealing with leket, which is a commandment to be charitable and kind to the poor, is directly linked to the salvation of mankind. Leket Israel, the National Food Bank, serves as Israel's leading food rescue and redistribution network, actively working to alleviate nutritional insecurity in Israel through its many projects. With a task force of volunteers and staff members, over 220 tons of food per week is transferred to 190 nonprofit partners, including soup kitchens, homeless shelters, senior shelters, and other social service organizations around Israel, reaching 140,000 needy people on a weekly basis. As an umbrella organization for food agencies nationwide, Leket Israel also offers nutrition education, cooperative purchasing, food safety, and capacity building projects designed to improve professional standards among the nonprofit organizations with which it partners. Leket Canada supports this monumental humanitarian effort through the raising of funds to support the infrastructure in Israel required to select, collect, and transport the food which daily alleviates hunger afflicting the poor in Israel. From the school child with no breakfast to the elderly, hungry, and lonely Holocaust survivor. In Hebrew, this is deemed an act of chesed, or loving kindness and mercy. Organizations such as Leket illustrate that faith, goodwill, and humanity resides in the heart of those who love Israel. All we need now is peace. In 6 days, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the liberation and reunification of Jerusalem, the city of peace, the heart of the Jewish nation and its eternal capital. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and I wish all of you continued success in your divinely blessed mission.